Story 1. Up until my mid-20s, I would have told you there's no such thing as ghosts. Most things that people say, I think, are their imagination or wishful thinking. Now, I don't know. I just don't know. When I was in my 20s and newly married, my spouse and I moved for his job. We needed to find a place to live pretty quickly. We lucked into the perfect house. It was old. In its previous life, it had been someone's beach cottage, which I loved. What's better than living in a resort town, close enough to walk to the beach? Plus, it wasn't in a resort area. It was on the back half of someone's property, with one road in and out, and lots of trees and shade. Very quiet, no other people around. Because the house was originally a weekend cottage, it was one big room, with a small addition to one side that contained a kitchen and bath, and another addition off the back that had a bedroom. The big room was awesome. All windows are on 3 sides with a nice breeze most of the time, a fireplace, lots of open areas. The only thing that kind of pinged my radar was the landlord. When we rented, he was overly insistent that we signed a year's lease and that we couldn't break it for any reason. No matter what, we needed to pay out the lease whether we lived in the house or not. I thought that was a little weird, the way he kept repeating that over and over because he wanted to make absolutely sure that we understood. But it didn't really register at the time, other than I was a bit worried that maybe there were troublemakers or noisy parties on the beach or something. He assured us that it was a very quiet neighborhood, but he repeated again that we couldn't break the lease. I worked a 9-to-5 job. My spouse worked 12-hour on-off shifts, so there were lots of times when I would be home by myself. The first month or 2 were fine. I liked the house, I liked the neighborhood, I liked the beach. I'm mostly a homebody, so when my spouse was at work, I would stay at home reading, watching a little TV, or cooking. I'd always wanted to learn to knit, so I bought some yarn and started teaching myself. Then sometime around the 3rd month, I started to get very strong feelings that someone would be standing behind me while I was reading. You know, like looking over my shoulder. It only happened when I was alone in the house and only when I was in the main room. Without thinking about it too much, I started sitting places where my back was to the wall or reading in the bedroom. When I went to bed at night, I started closing the door between the bedroom and the rest of the house. I felt safe in the bedroom. Sometimes when I fell asleep in front of the TV late at night, I'd wake up to catch someone standing in front of the fireplace just out of the corner of my eye. I thought I needed to stop dreaming so much, but I started to stay in the bedroom after dark, with the door shut. Things started not being where I put them in the big room. I got kinda irritated with my spouse for messing with my stuff. I wasted 5 to 10 minutes almost every day looking for my handbag or my car keys. Then one day when I came home after work, I found my knitting yarn wrapped and tangled around all the furniture in the big room. I don't mean just a little bit. I mean the yarn was strung between couches and wrapped around the legs of the chairs. I told myself that my spouse was playing a trick on me and I cleaned it up. Then I decided that I wouldn't mention it to him, just to see how long it took him to come clean. He never did. I moved my knitting to the bedroom. My sister came to visit for a long weekend. I'd gushed so much about our lovely beach house that she came to visit and see the beach. She came for a 4-day weekend. She slept on the pull-out sofa in the big room. After the first night, she told us that the sofa wasn't very comfortable, and she thought she was coming down with something, so she changed her travel arrangements and she was leaving that afternoon. She seemed agitated, but she wouldn't talk about it. A few days after she went home, she called me. She started the conversation with, "I know you don't believe in ghosts and maybe I'm just being stupid." My heart dropped. I thought I was the only one and I was being so stoic and pretending I never saw or heard anything. She went on to tell me that after she went to sleep that night in the big room, noises woke her up in the middle of the night. She thought it was one of us, but no one was there. Then while she was sitting in the bed looking around, the windows started opening and closing. It just kind of went around the room. One window opened and closed, then the one next to that, then the next one, and the next one. Then she heard footsteps walking straight towards her, but no one was there. The footsteps walked right up to the bed where she was sitting, then over the bed, continued across the room, and out through the side door into the kitchen area. She said she ran out the front door and spent the rest of the night on the front porch. She came back inside when the sun came up, waited for us to wake up, and made excuses to go home. She didn't want to spend another night in that house. She said, I know you won't believe me. That's okay. But I'm not ever sleeping in your house again." I told myself that my sister had always been a little nutty about stuff like that, so knowing that the house was old, she probably just had a very vivid dream. I kept telling myself that, a few weeks after that, just when I'd stopped jumping at every stray noise. I woke up one Sunday morning and went to cook a leisurely breakfast for me and my spouse. And y'all, I still don't know how to explain this. I opened the kitchen cabinets to get the dishes out to start cooking. All the dishes were rearranged, not messy, not tumbled about. They were all very neat and orderly, but everything was on the wrong shelf. The shelf that normally held glasses now had plates stacked on them. The shelves that normally held bowls now had glasses on them. My first thought was that someone had been in the house during the night. I checked all the locks. I was still locked. We didn't know many people, and I couldn't think of anyone who would pull a trick like that. Besides, there was so much stuff moved that no one could do it quietly without disturbing people sleeping in practically the next room. So I did what any half-crazed, scared-to-shit person would do. I pretended it never happened. I pretended that I always kept the glasses on that shelf, and there was nothing strange about having all the plates on this shelf. I sure as hell wasn't moving anything back because I didn't want to see what would happen if I did. I cooked breakfast. I went on with my day. And later that afternoon, I told my spouse that I wasn't comfortable in this house anymore. Could we find somewhere else to live? Amazingly enough, my spouse never asked me why. He simply said that was probably a good idea, and let's find something quick. And we moved out. We called the landlord after we'd already packed and moved the furniture. He came over and picked up the keys. He never, not once, asked why we were moving. He never met our eyes. He just kept looking at the ground. We agreed to keep paying rent until he could get some new tenants. Months later, I asked my spouse if he ever felt anything strange in that house. He said, "Yeah, that wasn't a good house. Glad we moved." And we never talked about it again. Story 2. 2 houses on one property. We moved into one of them when I was 8 to 10 years old, at the request of the property owner, to keep an eye on the property as he lived about 8 hours away. This was in the early 1980s. Almost immediately, we, my parents, siblings, and I, began to see an apparition standing on the back porch of the other house. It was blue and in the shape of a woman wearing a big dress and holding an open umbrella over her head. No features were visible, just the shape. It was not visible all day, but it was visible at various times every day. It was not just us that could see it. Any visitor we would have could see the apparition. Some of my dad's friends would come over and, along with my dad, stand in our yard just staring at it. We lived there for 2 years, and I could type all day about the experiences we had. We were given a key to the other house, and my mom would go across the yard to use the phone in the kitchen and call my dad at work on his lunch break. She would demand that I go with her, due to her fear. The key was to the back door, which was accessed by the back porch. When you entered the back door, you found yourself in the kitchen. Now, if the apparition was visible, Dad didn't get a phone call. As soon as you walked into the house, it was as if you were walking through water up to your neck. The air was just thick and heavy. I remember one instance when she was sitting in the kitchen on the phone, and I was seated at the kitchen table, scared out of my mind. There was a dish drainer next to the sink with silverware and a plate or two in it. It started rattling like someone was shaking it. We both ran out of there. Another time we were in the kitchen and a door deeper in the house began to slam over and over real fast. Bam, 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 bam. It too instigated a quick egress. In one of the bedrooms, there was an old dresser that each drawer that had these metal loops on each end. One day those began shaking violently and rattling so loud we could hear it in the kitchen. I once went to grab a glass that was on the counter to get a drink of water from the sink. I was not able to get it. It slid away from my hand, down the length of the counter, and fell into the sink, breaking. Another time I had to use the restroom while my mother was on the phone. I walked down the hallway, and as I did, I could hear voices, 2 men and a woman talking. The closer I got to the bathroom, the louder it got. As I opened the door and flipped on the light, I saw something that I can see now just as vividly as then, almost 40 years later. Standing in the huge bathtub was a woman, wearing a big dress like what was worn in the 1920s. She was holding an open umbrella above her. Standing on either side were 2 men. The men were wearing overalls, white with thin blue stripes and matching caps. They immediately stopped talking, and all 3 looked at me with anger. I screamed, ran back up the hall, past my mom, out of the kitchen, and never touched the back porch. My mom was right behind me, not knowing why I ran, but assuming the situation dictated evacuation. One time I was heading to the bathroom. My mom would not let me leave her alone inside, and as soon as I got to the head of the hallway, every door to every room in the hallway slammed shut. I decided to hold my pee. One winter, my parents brought a heavy blanket over to our house from the other house. The owner had said we could borrow anything from the other house. That same day, we began having experiences in our house. The TV would come on. This was the day of the big console TVs with the big click knobs. It might be at 2 a.m. or it might be at 2 p.m. You would hear a pop and then the TV was on. All of us might be in the living room watching MASH after the 9 p.m. news, and the toilet in the bathroom would flush. I saw my dad lean over the bed one night to remove a book that my mom had been reading in the bed. The book was open and lying page down in the middle of the bed. As soon as his hand got close, the book jumped about a foot away, similar to the glass experience I had had. He then had to put a knee on the bed so he could stretch further. The book jumped away again, this time falling off onto the floor. By this time, he was lying on the bed and reached onto the floor and was able to grab the book. He carried it to the back door and flung it out into the yard. My dad would take friends from work and they would walk around the inside of the other house together to see what area would make the hair on their arm stand up the most. Again, 2 years of experience from living there. Almost daily experiences. My dad found an old photo album in the one day, and we all were in the kitchen flipping through it. About halfway in, I saw a picture that made my blood freeze. The same 3 people I had seen in the bathroom were depicted in a photograph standing in the rail yard in town in what looked like the early 1900s. The woman, I come to learn, was married to one of the train engineers who was standing next to her. The other man was the husband's friend, also a train engineer. The house we were in was the home of the husband and wife. That day in the hallway, as I proceeded towards the bathroom, I could hear their conversation. One of the men wanted to leave and the other man, along with the woman, was adamantly against leaving. Then I walked in and interrupted this conversation. Shortly after finding the photo album, we moved. I suppose my father had enough of his family being terrified, being woken up in the middle of the night by blankets being yanked off of you, doors slamming, lights going on and off, TV coming on, waking up to apparitions standing next to the bed, the foot of the bed, or even just blobs floating around the room like a dark mist. Several years later, I joined the military and left. After being gone from the state for 20 years, I moved back to the area with my wife and kids. I started a delivery company and one day had a job on the same road as that house. Oh, the emotions that surged through me as I drove by. I expected to see the house crumble, or maybe see that the woods and brush had taken over the place, as it is very rural. Much to my surprise, people are living there. I made my delivery and on the way back, I pulled up into the yard. The same yard that almost 40 years prior I played in under the watchful eye of the Blue Lady. A woman about my age and a young woman who appeared in her mid-20s stepped out into the yard to see what I wanted. I made up some BS story about being from the area, moving away then back, and was looking to write a book about the area and its history. I mentioned that I had lived on the property when I was a kid. I asked them if they had had any experiences in the house. The woman looked surprised, and the younger woman looked scared. They confirmed that in the 4 or 5 years of living there, they had experienced some puzzling things, pictures removed from walls, doors slamming and such. But it had been a while since anything had happened. I learned that the original family of the place finally sold it after all of the elderly ones passed on. The first buyer had barely closed on it and moved in before she decided that she no longer found it appealing. She moved post-haste. Then the people I was talking to bought it. No, they didn't believe in ghosts. No, they could not explain how family pictures would be on the living room wall when going to bed and on the kitchen floor in the morning. Story 3. In 1997, I was stationed in Germany while in the U.S. Army. I met a little German girl who captured my heart. This year will be our 21st wedding anniversary. She lived in an apartment building on the 5th floor and a couple of towns away from where my barracks were. I would go stay at her place on the weekends for puzzle cutting classes. So, one of the things I love about Germans is their ability to maximize space. Underneath the apartment building was a parking garage. There was a parking lot out front that I used mostly, but on cold days I used the one underneath the building. She didn't drive, so her designated stall was empty. She gave me the code to access the garage, but if I parked outside, I had to buzz her apartment from a keypad downstairs. She would buzz the door open, and I could then access the elevator. If you took the elevator down to the basement garage, a motion sensor light would activate when the elevator door opened. Conversely, if you entered the hallway to the elevator from the garage, the light would turn on. Additionally, the elevator was huge. However, there were partitioning doors in the elevator, so normally the elevator is small. If you were moving in or out of the building, you called the housemeister, who would unlock and open the partitioning door, and the elevator tripled in size so you could move your furniture. So one night I went to see my girl, rang her apartment, and she buzzed the door. As I walked up to the elevator, the doors were opening, but no one exited. I found that odd, but stepped in anyway. By this point in my life, I had had several supernatural encounters. See my other posts on this thread, and could sense when something was amiss. When I stepped into the elevator, I turned around like normal, smashed the none 5 button, and waited, but the door didn't close. I instantly felt the presence of something sinister. It seemed like whatever it was hiding in the dark part of the elevator behind the partitioning doors, peering at me through the gap. I had the overwhelming desire to step out and take the stairs, but I didn't. I just smashed the number 5 again. Suddenly, the elevator doors slammed shut. By slammed, I mean slammed. It was loud, like someone kicked over a metal trash can. But when they closed, they flung back open and then slammed closed again. I didn't know elevator doors could move that fast. The carriage then plummeted down to the basement and flung open, banging into whatever was on the inside of elevator door frames. The doors were all the way open, and then the motion sensor light flicked on, so no one was down there, and called the elevator, changed their mind, and went back into the garage. The doors then repeated their slamming and opening sequence and launched up to the 5th floor, quickly. The keypad in the elevator dinged every second as it passed all of the floors. Ding, 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 ding. When it reached the 5th floor, they banged open again, and I lurched my scared body out. It was so loud that my girl opened her door down the hall. As I approached, she told me to quiet down, or I would wake up the other tenants. Apparently, I was white as a sheet because she then asked me what happened. What's wrong? I told her that her blankety-blank elevator was haunted and tried to kill me. I took the stairs until we got married and had to use that cursed elevator to move the 11,000-pound couch she had. Story 4. In 2015, I was a CIT with an out-of-state sheriff's deputy. I ran a specialized team doing crime suppression. One night we were nearing the end of our shift, and one of my team members and I had our patrol cars parked nose to nose, and we were sitting on the push bumpers talking. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. We were in the parking lot of a rural church next to what appeared to be a gymnasium. There were glass doors on the side of the building adjacent to us, and the glass was covered with newspaper on the inside, leading me to believe there was some sort of construction going on in there. There were no other vehicles in sight. As we talked, the glass doors started rattling like someone was shaking them from the inside. It lasted 3 to 4 seconds. It stopped my team member in mid-sentence, and we both just stared at the doors. We then looked at each other and made comments about weirdness and/or spookiness. That immediately changed the conversation to haunted houses, and we pondered the idea of haunted churches. He then mentioned a house in one of the towns in the county. He was from the area and had never seen the house occupied. However, he had been dispatched there before due to loud music complaints, only to arrive and find the place empty. He said, "There is one light on at the house, and it is a single bulb hanging in the garage. The only door to the house that is unlocked is one that is accessed from the garage. Also in the garage is the attic access door." He said that on one of his dispatches there for loud music complaints, he heard a stomping run in the attic. He dropped the door, climbed the ladder, fully expecting to be knocked on the head with a beer bottle, and found no one up there. As he shined his light around, he had my interest. See my other post on this thread. Since it was on the way back to the sheriff's department and I had to go there to put my K9 in the kennel, and he had to go that way to go home, we decided to have ourselves a look-see. Upon arrival, I noticed only one neighbor about 300 yards away. He said they were always the complainants for the calls he rides here. The house was brick, and it was big. 1 story, but long. He told me the interior was arranged funky. We both hit records on our body cameras as we walked into the garage. Indeed, there was a lonely light bulb dangling from the ceiling. Strange, I thought. If the house has been empty for what appeared to be years, who is paying the electric bill? Why have power in the house? We both approached the door that leads into the house. It had a screen door and then a heavy wooden door, and both were unlocked. In fact, the wooden door was slightly ajar. Abandoned property on the edge of town seems like a honey hole for vagrants and ne'er-thee wells. I used my flashlight, pushed the wooden door open, and then shined my light into the house. The light shined deep into the house and lit up a brick wall about 40 feet in. Apparently, the door only opened about 90 degrees due to a wall behind it. When I had used my light to push the door, I had used a little more force than necessary. The door bounced off the wall and swung back closed. I used my light to push it open again and said, "This is a big house," and shined my light in again. As my light hit the brick wall deep in the house the second time, a voice came from way back in the house that said, "Hello?" It sounded like someone half asleep and said, "Hello?" in a question. Perhaps my bright stinger flashlight had woken a sleeping homeless person. My team member standing directly next to me asked, "Did you just hear a hello?" I confirmed that I did and radioed for my other team members. We were all also on the SWAT team and worked great together clearing structures. I explained to them that someone was in the residence, said hello, but then refused further invitations to come out. 5 of us entered the house. It was big, and it was arranged funky indeed. Multiple hallways, small rooms with big closets. To give you an idea of how old the house was, there was an 8-track player integrated into the living room wall, and each room had speakers. Occasionally, as we were clearing the house, the speakers would crackle, adding to the tension. Every exterior door was locked and chained from the inside, with the exception of the door we entered. Every window was locked. There was no one in the house other than us. My other team members thought we were BSing them. I then recalled that I had my body camera on, as did the deputy I went there with. I told the deputy to give me the SD card in his camera. I was going to show them we were serious. I put my laptop on the hood of my patrol vehicle and inserted the SD card. Upon playback, no voice. It made no sense. Perhaps the voice was just too far in the house for the camera to pick up. While everyone was saying, "Phew, you liars," I pulled out my SD card and popped it in the laptop, and there it was. But there was something sinister about it. The voice was not far away. It sounded like it was coming from about 2 feet away, as if they were standing in the door when I pushed it open and wanted to know what the hell I was doing there at 3 in the morning. It shut everyone up. Both of us heard it with our ears. Both of us had our body cameras recording, but only mine captured the voice. I have since retired and moved back to my home state. I still have that video and stumble across it sometimes. It still freaks me out. Why me? Story 5. I was 100% skeptical and didn't believe in anything paranormal. And then my kid, 6 years old at the time, was the one who turned my beliefs on their head. We were living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and my kid just couldn't ever sleep well at night. I didn't think much of it at the time, downplaying it as normal insomnia, which I had struggled with too as a kid. The thing that struck me as weird about it is that she never deviated from her original reason of why she couldn't get to sleep. She would come out of her room to tell me that there was an old man in her room, telling her to leave because he lived there. I had the typical eye-roll reaction, giving my kid a reaction like, "Well, you don't have to be asleep, but you need to stay in bed when it's bedtime." Because I didn't believe her, as if it was all make-believe. That was a mistake. After several months of living there and doing this routine regularly with my kid, I got a photo debit card in the mail from a bank that I don't do business with, addressed to a different name. My first reaction was to think, this is identity theft, or the previous tenant didn't notify their bank that they moved out. So I called the bank, read the numbers off the card, and then while I was wrapping up the call, I had put it down on the table to find the scissors, as the banker told me to cut up the card. When my kid hears the conversation and comes over to see the card on the table, I'm off the phone with the bank, and my kid says to me right away, "That's the old man in my room, that's him." I'm thinking to myself that this has got to be some sort of make-believe scenario again. Yeah, the picture shows an elderly white man with white hair and a white beard, but that's got to be a coincidence, right? Right? So fine, I'm going to prove that. I look up the name in quotes, along with the name of my town. The first search result is this man's obituary. Still not wanting to believe what my 6-yo was telling me, I got in touch with his surviving family members via Facebook, who were mentioned in the obituary. I found out that this gentleman died in the apartment, succumbing to cancer. He was waiting to move in with his son and convalesce there, but passed away before the move happened. Also, I think it's worth noting that my landlord had no legal obligation to tell me that someone died in the apartment before I moved in because it was a natural death. It would have been different if it were a homicide. I should note that I never saw him or heard him. The ghost, that is. I only knew about this because of my kid. I asked her about all the things that he had said to her. I pay rent on time every month, and this is my place, not yours, were the most frequent complaints. I worked with a psychic medium to help us deal with this problem. That's another story. But ended up moving out as soon as my lease was up. TLDR. I finally believe in ghosts because of my 6-year-old kid and getting evidence in my face, a photo bank card of the man that my kid said wouldn't leave her room, and then Googling to find his obituary to silence my skepticism. Now, not only do I believe in ghosts and the paranormal, but because of that experience and all of the new experiences that followed, I can tell the difference between a legit psychic medium and a fake cold reader. Tip: cold readers are the ones who ask if you lost a loved one with a name starting with M, but the legit psychics can provide a detail that is specific enough that they couldn't have possibly guessed it.
The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.